Back in the 90s, the Paris-Dakar race was very important in Europe. It was something huge. And I remember as a teen to go running to my house so I could see a summary of the race on TV. The motorcycles on the race started to be bigger and a lot more powerful. They also added fairings to improve the aerodynamics and give greater protection to the drivers. So around the same period, the largest motorcycle manufacturers started to offer models to the general public that looked very much like the ones engaged on the race. And thanks to that, we had amazing adventure bikes in Europe, and most of them never reached the USA. Starting by the biggest manufacturer, Honda, we first had the Africa Twin, a V-Twin, which started as a 650 and evolved for close to 15 years up to a 750 engine. An amazing bike, and I was lucky enough to have one. We also had the little sister of the Africa Twin, the Transalp, with a very similar V-twin engine, but this time it started as a 600, and for the first couple of years it was also sold in the US, but it wasn't a very big success, so they just stopped selling it there. But in Europe it was a bestseller. Thousands of them were sold for a long period of time. It then evolved to a 650, which I had two of them. The first one I had, I very heavily modified it to use it for hard off-road and travels to North Africa. You can find a link here on all the modifications I did to that bike. It evolved again to a 700, which is the bike I'm riding on this video, and I've also published a lot of videos about it and all the modifications I'm doing to this bike with the same intent to make it more reliable and better for off-road and for long distance travel to isolated places. And it was sold for a few years until they stopped production, and there was a large gap of time until the actual Transalp 750, which luckily is being sold all around the world. In Europe we also had a very nice single-cylinder Honda with a full fairing, which was very capable off-road and on the road, and was a weapon of choice for the cities. And I'm talking about the Honda NX 650 Dominator, a bike very similar to the XR 600 that was sold in the US, but with more basic suspensions, a full fairing, more comfortable for everyday use and travel, and also electric starter, except for the 2 or 3 first years of production, when it had both Kickstarter and electric starter. And this bike also evolved mostly aesthetically until the beginning of the 2000s. A very, very well sold motorcycle in Europe, a bestseller. Yamaha also had his fair share of success selling bikes in Europe. They were participating in the Dakar with a very big and powerful bike, and they won several years with it. Also, Yamaha had a long history of participating in the race with the XT500 first, and then several models until these big bikes appeared. And the equivalent for the general public was the Super Tenere 750, A very powerful bike back then with 70 horsepower and on a bike that was just slightly over 200 kilograms in weight. And a very nice bike too, very nice aesthetically, and which also had a great success in sales. If you wanted something smaller or lighter than the Super Tenere, you had a single cylinder version, the Tenere, which started as a 600 and evolved to a 650. And it was frequently the chosen model by Europeans who wanted to travel across Africa with a big tank, light enough to cross on the difficult parts, and very reliable and very practical for long off-road travel. Suzuki didn't want to lose a share of sales in Europe, so they presented a couple of models, very nice. Back then they had a very large range of dual sport bikes, the DR, from the DR50 moped to the DR 600 and the 650. They had a very huge range of bikes that were sold both in Europe and in the US. But for the European market, they launched first the DR 750 big due to the large size of this single cylinder, which then evolved to a 800. I think it's probably one of the largest single cylinder sold to the general public, and it also had a great success. So much, in fact, that they launched a smaller version, the DR650 RS and RSE, depending if it was a Kickstarter or electric starter. I had 4 of these bikes, 2 RS and 2 RSE, and a few months ago I published a video with the better tips to improve these bikes for off-road and travel use. Amazing little bikes, very light, very powerful. They were close to 50 horsepower back then. That's 30 years ago. So I had very good memories of these bikes. If I'm not mistaken, in the US they had the dual sport version of this bike without a fairing, which depending on the market was called DR650 Air or DR650S, or also Jebel in some places. Now the fourth Japanese manufacturer, Kawasaki, they didn't have a big participation in the race, in the Paris-Dakar race, but they didn't want to lose the train of the sales to the public. So in the US they had the KLR 650, but the trend in Europe was to have a full fairing on dual sport bikes, on big dual sport bikes. So they created the KLR 650 Tengai, which was the version for Europe with a fairing, the version of the KLR. And now I want to ask the viewers, because I have some doubts, so please let me know in the comments. But back then BMW had very good success in the Paris-Dakar race. They launched for the general public the first GS of the saga, the R80 GS, and which was a huge success. And it has two versions, the standard one and the Dakar one, which had a bigger tank and some different things. And I think this model was never sold in the US, at least officially, but I'm not 100% sure of that. So please let me know in the comments if this model was ever sold in the US. It also evolved and grew bigger and bigger. We then had in Europe the R100 GS, and it kept evolving and getting bigger. We also had some more exotic models, mostly Italian, like for example the Cagiva Elephant with a Ducati V-twin engine, which started with a capacity of 750 and then grew to 900 with not as many sales as the Japanese ones or the BMW, but a good amount of units were sold in Europe too. And also with not so much success, but a few of them were sold to the Aprilia Touareg 600, which was a single cylinder motorcycle. And also I think this model was never sold in the US, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Back then we also had several small manufacturers which were producing small quantity of bikes, adventure bikes, usually with engines coming from other manufacturers, and but they sold very few units, and mostly in their own countries, so they're not very well known, and I'm pretty sure they didn't sell any out there in the US. And in fact, if you have more information about these small manufacturers, please let me know in the comments, because they have most of them have very nice history, even if they produced not so many units of bikes. I'm thinking, for example, Barrigo, which was a French manufacturer, and a few years later arrived KTM with its adventure models, single cylinder and V-twin, but these ones were sold also in the US, so they're not subject of this video. So yes, in for 15-20 years in Europe we were extremely lucky to have all these amazing adventure bikes that were sold by the biggest manufacturers, and sadly most of them were never sold in the US. The taste there was different, and here it was, I really think it was thanks to the Paris-Dakar race, which had a very huge impact on the general public and the taste of the people. And I was lucky to have several of these amazing bikes. So what do you think about? Would have you liked to have this model sold in the US? And have I forgotten any model that you think is relevant? And yeah, give me your impressions in the comments, please. Cheers!